Good morning, everyone. This is May 23rd, here from Vancouver, the year 2021. Today, we have a very special guest, Ananda Bosman, whose bio was so full of wonderful things. It was really difficult for me to pick just one, but fortunately, he was able to pick one. He's a visionary, an author, a shaman, winner of music awards. He was the founder of the 432 electronic music movement, revolution, actually, the revolution of we. And I'm just so happy that he's here. He's going to talk to us about a lifetime of UFO encounters, and he's been a lifetime contactee. So take it away, Ananda. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Mimi, and for inviting me. This has been through the auspices of Alfred Lumbermont Weber, our colleague who's doing great work, who made the connection to you and the Vancouver UFO meetup. So wonderful to meet you all here in Vancouver. We're in the greater metropolitan Vancouver coastal region. And we have people, I think, that are going to be joining this from all over the world. Some said later. I believe some of you have had technical difficulties, and I'm sorry about that. We're in a day and age where we have to go beyond Google. We get our own website and make our own emails. It's necessary. It's a great pleasure to be here and to give this presentation. I gave this presentation to the forest behind here, to the rocks on Friday. So I hope I'm able to bring all of this material in. We're going to have a format where we will be presenting our thesis. We have slides and we have video, including of UFO film here at the coastal Vancouver metropolitan, greater metropolitan region on April the 13th. We are non-dogmatic, non-sectarian, so we might be speaking in certainties, but you can say, when we say it is, maybe, but we like the freedom of expression, so we will be speaking in certainties, but we're not saying it is necessarily so. We've been 35 years consciously engaging the UFO, although in 1972 I had my first encounter in the Swiss Alps. So our way of speaking is from broad fields. We cover many fields, whilst the UFO has been part of the life-changing series of events. It was really triggered by 2 near-death experiences. So there is the mystical element too, and we do explore the mystical sciences. So we have that filter as well. I will briefly do an introduction, share screen, if that's possible. We have 3 books up at present. Our website's anandabosman.com, 432hertz.com, 432hertz.com. And for those interested in the diamond body lotus protocols, 200 different types of protocols and exercises, that's the website, that's information at present. So that's how you can contact us. We have been working on a series called Mystics, which was accepted by Netflix. And we started filming in February of 2020. Here I am with filmmaker Param Gill on the right. I'm on the left. In between is Sir Santilli, Rogero Maria Santilli, who is the founder of Brand New Science, which was born from his UFO contact. So we took his UFO contact in the early 80s. His whole family had this UFO encounter, and he went inside. And the module that he encountered was the plantoids. There are different modules, and this is what we're going to be exploring in our thesis. And when he came back from that, and this is a MUFON case, it was a eureka moment. So he created a whole new branch of physics, correcting the insufficiencies of quantum mechanics, which is 1934 science, and introducing this whole new branch and restoring Einstein determinism to particle physics, and it changes everything, including the UFO. So he's going to be important in terms of correcting some of the errors that are still in Dr. Jack Sarfati's work. We'll mention him because he's a useful example of the module. Unfortunately, because of lockdown, it's been stalled, so it's going to be suspended until things open up again. That's mystics, and there's also dialogues with UFOs being planned. We're going to be using now a Hollywood North Vancouver team to do some of the shooting. But before I go into my thesis, which will be fairly extensive, I want to explore people who have been on the record that have given examples of what we are suggesting. You've got National Reconnaissance Organization Chief Master Sergeant Daniel Sultan, who is well known in the Disclosure Project, in the 450 different witnesses that were filmed. However, before that, he gave other types of information. He says that the ETs are actually beings of light, and that they make their bodies from local solar system materials. This includes the Nordic type and the gray life seed carrier types, also robot grays that are made by them. In 1998,
one of the light beings is created for a certain purpose, and sometimes you can destroy them. We can destroy them. We have did that purposely, and sometimes accidentally.
So he was involved in the Project Pounce, which is the recovery units of crashed UFOs. So he says that when one of the light beings is created for a certain purpose, some can be destroyed. They really do not need bodies if they are traveling through space or through time. But to manipulate things in a solar system to which they go, they take on the molecules of that solar system, and they make themselves a body that they can use and manipulate. The body is of no use to them when they leave here. They leave it or it just dematerializes. They are the workers, the ones that are about 5.5 foot tall, that are blonde, pale, skin exposed to the sun too long, kind of reddish. So that disappeared for a while from the internet. I think it's back on. And this was 10 years after our contacts said exactly the same in 1988. So we published that in 1992, so it's on the public record that this is independent information. So the same information was given. In terms of our experience, it is several different facets. After a near-death experience, we came back and we had memory of other planets and other planes. We started to see the UFO and had various forms of interaction with the UFO. So our experience has been very broad, and we're now going to be presenting the idea of a super intelligence, almost incomprehensible to us as we know ourselves today, that uses modules, distinct modules of interface, which is called the UFO experience. These modules of interface are synthesized realities. Now, this is something that Dr. John Mack, very early on, also pointed to. He found that after using hypnosis, that Harvard's Dr. John Mack started using transpersonal psychology. And with the transpersonal psychology, he had the abductee go through crisis, spiritual crisis, psychological crisis. And when they digested this through meditation, the next time they had a physical contact, the same beings were there, but their form had changed. The environment had changed. The procedures changed. Started with themes of taking sperm and egg, and maybe implantation, rectal probes, etc. Quite frightening. But then in the next episode, the procedures changed. It was more information-based. A series of these transpersonal psychological sessions over a period of time, in some cases, led to what were grays being seen as spheres of light that then joined a nexus, a grid of spheres. So he extrapolated from that the UFO contact experience is a synthesized reality. Whilst physically real, there must be hyperdimensions involved. And these hyperdimensions also consider the psyche of the individual experiencer. Now, in the 80s, as we were having our experiences, we had the extraterrestrial hypothesis. That was our understanding of it. We understand everything with the contact experience is like a graphic interface to a superintelligence. A graphic interface where you have icons and double click on those icons. That's the actual physical experience. So in the 80s, we were having difficulty remembering. We would go into the UFO, we would remember falling back onto the bed and bouncing. And that was also observed by my mother's husband, Jeff Sedgwick, who went into the room and saw me falling onto the bed. The near-death experience led me into, when I was 15, led me into a hypersphere out of the body, where I was surrounded by these golden light beings that were called the Emmanuel. And through the Emmanuel, I came in contact with the UFO intelligences. They acted as a kind of umbrella. And this is not just ultra-terrestrial, this is inter-universal or omniversal intelligences who were able to modulate in different domains. And clear understanding would come through. Then I would tell my mother that I'd come from another planet, 15, and I'd take her outside and I show her the UFOs because I started to be able to summon the UFO. Heart coherence, willed intent, looking into the sky, looking at an area of the sky that might be darker, there it would emerge and it would do different things. It would respond to the consciousness by brightening up and pulse flashing. It would zigzag, it would curve, it would change direction, etc. So, of course, she said, yes, sure, you're from another planet. I showed her, she saw that. So, I was working daily with the UFOs in fieldwork in England. This is Southwest England, in portal work. And I was being educated that way. I was also being overlighted by the Emmanuel, which would fuse my 5 senses. And, that would be embodied in the whole body. And this living image foundry of information would flow through. And one UFO in 1986 then flew over me, parked above me, and released a beam. All the cells of the body are tingling. A small vehicle passed by nearby. There was communication through the beam that this was a fine tuning. So this vehicle passed by. And then they told me to go into a meditation state. And what happened then was that I went into what I called ETVR, extra temporal virtual reality. This is like a virtual reality internet of the UFO intelligences. You have a representation of your nervous system, like in an avatar. Sensorial apparatus is translated, and you're traveling through this information network, traveling to the moon, traveling to Mars, moons of Jupiter, very commonly to the moons of Jupiter or Neptune and Saturn. And so this ETVR is different to the out-of-body experience, which we also had. So we had parallel streams of things going on, the mystical and the UFO. The UFO crosses over to the mystical because it's a module or modules of the super intelligence. The modules that are created are having a time signature that may be impermanent. So thereby, people might remember being implanted, and then months later, they have a scan made. There's no implant there. And we will go into specific examples of this phenomenon. So a physical reality is created, but the permanence of it has a variable time that is in the module. Some of the modules may be much longer, and some only days or hours of a synthesized reality. With the ETVR, the extratemporal virtual reality, we got confirmation of it in particular ways. So in August of 1986, we went to the Swiss Alps, and we went to the glacier of Verpekle. This is an area where I had my first contact in 1972 at the tree level area where the tree level stops, so about 3,000 meters. My mother was a painting artist, and I was playing by a pond, and I remember a golden sphere encompassing me. I remember going into the vacuum, and I don't remember anything else. I come back, and I'm drawing lemniscate in the sand, figure 8. And I discovered there's a man calling for me, John Blueberry. And so what had happened was that I had disappeared for many hours. My mother had to go back down to civilization, assemble a search party, and then they were looking for many hours. That was the first experience. I remember it very well because the head of the search party was given a whole bar of Swiss chocolate, and I'd never had a full bar of Swiss chocolate. This place I went to numerous times, and I've also done dialogues with civilian pilots there. So we began our civilian dialogues where we're also gathering technical data for the contact. On July the 20th, 2013, the first one in the Swiss Alps on July 20th, 2013, had everybody experiencing their own UFO manifestations based on the protocols. And also the UFO responding to their consciousness. That is, coherent protocols of biofeedback are taught where you sustain coherence or compassionate heart with heart will. And as sustained coherence grows, you focus it on the manifested UFO. And generally, the UFO does something in response. It becomes brighter, it flashes the amounts of flashes you might be doing in your heart. So you might be going 3 times with your heart with compassionate love. And the UFO responds. And that is perhaps the most convincing factor for people because they are experiencing in the objective reality something that is instantly responding to their consciousness and to their biological coherence of the heart. And there is also a unique signature that comes through with the UFO. Then we started using equipment to start recording these particular dialogues with the cosmos, as we call them. This is what we want to take into dialogues with UFOs on TV. It was supposed to be in Sedona. We'll see where it will be, but it has not been cancelled, so it is still up ahead. And we do this in a non-dogmatic way. We are establishing a dialogue that has an alphabet that responds to coherence, and the protocols that are used are based on biofeedback science that also correlate to scientific measurements of UFOs that have manifested in the Hessdalen Valley of Norway, where measurements have been done since the early mid-80s, and where an 8 Hertz signal is detected before the UFO appears, taking on plasma, becoming solid, taking on metal. The spectrum analysis shows scandium traveling up to 30,000 kilometers an hour, taking a 180-degree turn at 30,000 kilometers. The scientist flashes a laser at it. It responds with the same amount of flashes. These are scientific expeditions. So 8 Hertz is a key, and the measurements of the science of the heart shows that sustained coherence, 8 cycles per second. It trains the brain at 8 cycles per second. 8 cycles per second, one is in all dendrites of the brain in the most creative possible state. So there appears to be a message with the UFO, with the dialogue with the UFO, that it wants to interface with us on our foundational coherence. The HeartMath Institute of Scientists, for 27 years, measuring sustained coherence, have demonstrated that compassionate love, maintained for at least 2 minutes, instantly can affect the DNA half a mile distance. So the DNA sample will be focused on in the Petri dish, half a mile distance, to uncoil, to coil, and to change in the middle. So 3 changes are then observed as they do the fluorescent reading through the DNA. And that demonstrates that compassionate love, or the sustained biological coherence, is a non-electromagnetic, non-linear time machine. It's also a genetic engineer. So we are able to genetically engineer ourselves only in that state. The control groups, other brain states, other heart states, had no effect over the placebo effect on the DNA sample. So there is a triple intender, I think, there with the UFO. And we've done the experiments with Hessdalen without protocol, no UFO. The 2 times we used protocol, 8 Hertz protocols of sustained coherence, the UFO appears, and we recorded on film. So we will have that coming up later. So the Emmanuel Communicating Intelligences as a teenager also gave information on dream yoga, how to use my dreams to be able to bring back what was happening on the UFO in the experience phase of it. So this worked. I got quite a bit of memory back, being on the large motherships, the technician class of beings, which are gray or white or beige, various different forms. The humanoid forms. I was shown different types of humanoids, sometimes on screens. So that was one form. The other form was the ETVR, as we've mentioned. And we were in the Swiss Alps, at that place where we disappeared for hours when I was 2 years and 6 months in 1986. And UFOs were coming out of the mountain there. It turns out there's tons of tunnel systems in that area. We met a cousin who went inside, and we obtained some photographs of those. And one UFO flashed into my left eye, into my mother's right eye. And that particular flash activated something inside. And I went into ETVR mode, and I went into underground city underneath the glacier of Dent Blanche. So at that time, I had no idea there actually was a city there. I would learn that in 2003. This was 1986. In that city, under the glacier, there was a portal, and I was transferred to Ganymede, the moon of Jupiter, into a trans-dimensional, trans-linguistic, subterranean, sublunar base. And what I mean by that is there's a kind of omnijectivity that takes place in there. So the separation between the subjective, the object, and the objective is dissolved. And one's psyche, one's soul is in the entirety of the room. When another being comes in, whatever mode, modality, whatever locale it's coming from, whatever density, dimensionality, it is represented, it is transliterated, it's trans-linguistically transliterated. And its psyche joins the environment of the room. So you are able to comprehend intelligences that otherwise may be not comprehensible at all, incomprehensible. So then in 2003, I meet Madame André Foucher, and she's had a lot of experiences in this area of Switzerland, which is in Valais. It's in the high mountains above Sion, not far from the Matterhorn. And so she explains that she got permission to go into that city. I talk about that city and my experience. And she shows me photographs. And we had very particular experiences there, plasmas, and some of that plasma shown on the photograph. Furthermore, there is 200 different kilometers of tunnel systems, some of which has been used by the Swiss military. So there was a confirmation on that ETVR that way. Another way, another example was our contact with Krona. So the contacts with the ETVR or through the beams relayed to a galactic council, intergalactic council. However, from the onset of the contact, the Galactic Council is not really presented as we think of councils. They are described to be in a state of past, present, and future, where past, present, and future is indexed like an internet, hyper-indexed. So that becomes their reference, past, present, and future management. Hence their extratemporal, even hyper-temporal in terms of managing a galaxy, past, present, and future. The Emmanuel part ended after 7 years. They imparted tens of thousands of pages of living information. And the last information that was received was rather troubling. It was related to the mystery schools, secret societies, etc. So I said, look, I'm going to have to stop contact. I need to investigate this. And so we went very deep into research and gathered kilos of documentation at a rapid rate, made very good research, enabled that. And this led us to becoming, during the 90s, the semantic artist. In that phase, we continued having the modules of the UFO intelligences. So they acted then as my university professors, I could say. I went through a series of thresholds testing. I had an agreement with them that I could call them ethers. I could question if they're manipulating me, which I did, because not all of it was comfortable. But some of the things that I was adjusted into, in retrospect, were correct. So I had that arrangement.
What year was that, Ananda? I'm sorry, I was taking down the years.
Yes.
What year was that?
I'm
When you
introduced.
thought?
I'm already introduced to Galactic Council through the Emmanuel. So we had an Athena, we had Alkimar, Centauro, Krona. But 1992 was when the Emmanuel stream stopped, and we got then instead a 10 and a half year period where we had the tensor beam or ether beam connection to the UFO. And of course, I would be told a lot of things. I would be also told where UFOs would appear, and they would be there. I had various degrees of contact. In those various degrees of contact, also my parameters of what the UFO intelligence was or is were expanded. For instance, in 1991, I was in the Vouage Mountains above Lake Le Mans, Lake Geneva, with a friend, Fierto, I think November of 1991. And so I was in the field summoning the UFOs, as I often do, and we had our UFO sightings. But then a particular ship, whose quality I know because of its particularity, it's a golden ship, it's Athena. Athena ship comes pretty close to us and goes over us and lands in the forest behind us, which is the Vouage, which is a very thick vegetative forest. And then we hear Athena talking. She's talking to someone. And the quality of her voice is producing a consciousness effect, which is similar to when you remember a dream where someone is instructing you. This kind of sense, but we're awake, wide awake. And the quality of her voice was, as I described it, a waterfall of 1,000 voices. So her voice was in modes, all holographically spaced. So this is beyond normal voice. Then we decide to find a mountain path. It's dark, to go to a plateau. And I think this voice is following us, but where the voice is coming from, it's impossible to walk. Maybe the wild boars can charge through there, but you are not able to walk through that dense thicket. And that quality of the voice, of the waterfall of 1,000 voices, would continue. Athena has given multiple examples, and in the communication period to 2001, December 2001, most of which was highly personal, was fine-tuning and educating me. But they describe themselves. They describe how they decouple from a greater universe into multiple time cells, or splinter versions of themselves. And that if we were to see them with 90% of how they are, our sensorial apparatus will be blown out. So we can only have percentages of interface. And so in 1995, April the 13th, 1995, I had a 2% experience. So here we had, in the Norwegian forests, we were in South Norway, these 3 inverted trumpets that appeared, and then these figures appeared through those 3 inverted trumpets. And you see a particle-like nature to the bodies. And Athena was the triangulation point. She told me to step inside of her, and in her particle form, that was possible, but I passed through a threshold. And then when in her, she showed me something I would develop much later, these multi-dimensional geometries. So what I thought then was a 4th dimension with 7 different densities or planes, with ISO forms, mirror forms, where the 7th and the 1st are joined and the middle joins. And so the Platonic geometries were expanded to interdimensional geometries that is the unification of all the platonic solids. This became eventually our diamond body lotus protocols, which was synthesized in the new science. But she told me that I would be developing this, but it seemed pretty much impossible to what I was experiencing there. So that was another example, and she relayed that's 2%. That most people on this planet are not able to go beyond 2 to 5% because of the intensity of their actual nature. That they use many modules of interface. So the idea of the modules of interface is that this is a graphic interface. They can set different parameters, use different archetypes, and adjust it to the psyche of the experiencer. We have a friend who's not with us anymore, Dr. Rowney Lacan Kilder, who we met in Geneva in 1990. I was having a fame wave at that time. So we were introduced by colleagues, and she was also having a fame wave. She had recently come into the UFO phenomenon. She was a Finnish surgeon who started getting communication from her grandma. Then she went to the USA. She was with Dr. Andrea Puharish, which is a very particular scientist working with UFOs and gifted children in Urigella. And I think it was at Santa Fe that with Puharish, she saw this UFO, and then she started having her contacts. Her contacts were often with grays, but there were different humanoids that appeared in her contacts. And she was talking to audiences of hundreds of people saying, it's just great to be implanted. I can write a book in 2 weeks. And I looked at her, I said, there's something you don't know, and I think I might have to introduce you to. So a couple of years later, I interview her on camera. She goes through an experience where she's abducted, she's on the table, and they're going to introduce a new kind of lunar crescent implant in between her brain hemispheres. There were grays there, but there was also very tall beings whose heads were covered, but whose arms, she said, were spider-like. And she got the impression they were from Orion. That was the impression. So they operated on her. She's a surgeon, so she did the procedures. And they put in this crescent implant. And in the process of how they operated it in, there were metal filaments that were also on her forehead. So after the experience, she took those metal fragments, put them in into a test tube, and a week later she was going to fly from Geneva to Finland, and she would bring them to a lab. However, as a week passed and she came to the lab, the metal had dissolved, very similar to the angel pair of the 50s that came down from UFOs, would dissolve. And also scans showed that she didn't have an implant there, and she has numerous memories of being implanted. Now, what's interesting with Dr. Rowney Lacan Kilde is that she'll become an expert on human implants. Implants are primitive technology, so it doesn't make sense that ETs would use them, except in the sense of it representing something symbolically. However, she had physical evidence. That physical evidence was also seen by her husband, who was a United Nations officer, and others. It dissolved. And so in the idea of the module, a module is given a period of time where it's a synthesized reality that is physically real. It's not like the DMT encounters of abduction. We know, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Dr. Rick Strassman's work, DMT, the spirit molecule, where DMT is administered. 2 chapters deal with the abduction phenomena that occurs 20% of the cases. And most of those people had no interest in UFOs, and they would also receive implants. So he to seriously, because over 10 years, this 20% of his patients had this experience. He was watching them, of course, so there was no physical reality. He speculated that and he was to modulate the subatomic particles just slightly up to another parallel hyper dimension. So in those cases, the implants were part of that hyperdimensional link in his thesis of extrapolation. But as Dr. John Mack was dealing with abductees that were given, difficult ones, that were given from Bud Hopkins and from Dr. David Jacobs. Now, Dr. David Jacobs learned the hypnosis from Bud Hopkins, and Bud Hopkins, the artist, learned the hypnosis by hiring a hypnotherapist one time. And so they a lot of pre-programming. Basically, when they got a new client, they would tell the types of experiences that are usual before the hypnotic session, which is a big no-no. So John Mack got some of those patients, and as you mentioned, he started with hypnosis, but then decided to go to transpersonal psychology, which is more meditative. And it's developed by Dr. Stanislav Grof, who also worked with altered states of consciousness. And so clearly there are physical things going on. Although under hypnosis, of course, if people experience themselves burning, burn marks can develop. But there are many other environmental factors, physical factors, radiation, traces, witnesses, etc. So with Dr. Rowney Lukanen Kilde, then I decided to tell her after that interview about a Swedish man that we had studied with colleagues in Copenhagen called Robert Naesland. And Robert Naesland had been implanted in 1968 when he was in prison by SAPO, that is Swedish intelligence. And he had lots of scans of the different implants they had put in his head. He also had step-by-step photographs of operations where the implant was removed, showing the cutting of the skull, going in, and we could handle a piece of the crystal that had been put in. There were lots of doctor letters, etc. So it was very real, the implant work of Robert Naesland, and it was Swedish intelligence, SAPO, that was doing it. I almost regret having told Rowney about this man. I gave her the telephone number because she's an immensely spiritual person and very uplifting for many people. But she went ahead and contacted Robert Naesland, and this changed her life. So she became the head of the support group of Europe for those who had undergone mind control and radiation exposure and implantation exposure. So it's interesting that in her contacts, she encounters the implant. The implant is a metaphor, it's a plumb to another reality. It dissolves over time because it's a synthesized reality. But nevertheless, she would look at the forefront of implantation. She died tragically. She also became very paranoid, so not everything she was reporting was actually the case. But in no way one gets strong radiation treatment if one is an independent thinker. That's happened to all crucial independent researchers like Dr. Hammer. So that's with Rowney. With the ETVR, another example of the link to physical UFO. I'd stayed up all night in 1989, early 1989, and at 9 a.m. in the morning, I went into the EBR mode and had contact with Krona, Orion. Krona was one of the Galactic Council members we met with green skin of the type when copper is oxidized. So as I was having this contact with Krona, with the beam entrainment, Jeff Sedgwick was out in the garden. We were in Dorset in a 13th century monk's resting home at the time. It was a wonderful place to be, where we had our center. And he saw a massive plectrum shape, you know, like a guitar plectrum that you strung the strings with, shaped black UFO, triangular but not sharp at the edges, plectrum like that, flying over, massive at tremendous speed. Exactly at the time I was having the ET VR. So the ET VR had physical, verifiable references to it, and I think quite a few people are familiar with this aspect. Another experience in 1993 with my girlfriend then, Martina Godshell, in South Norway, and my mother at the equinox of 1993, was that Athena ship came across the lake where we lived, and the way that she manifested was like the utmost physicalized love and like the deepest ontological aspect of one's own consciousness being embodied physically, producing an omnijective-like effect. You're seeing the deepest part of what is cognitive in the foundation of one's being, ontological being, personified in love in that vehicle. As she comes towards us, then she jumps and goes to another position of the lake, and then she jumps to a field, makes several jumps and disappears. This is in the evening light. And all three of us have that same experience. So the various forms of interface with the communicating intelligence have been pushing our thresholds. Now we've had 35 years to deeply meditate through our experiences, the people who we've met who've had experiences, and the research fields we've also deeply looked into. And through that, we come to the postulation of superintelligence. It's extrapolated from many, many different places. It's self-evident. One useful module to understand modules is Dr. Jack Sarfatti. Dr. Jack Sarfatti claims to have worked out the propulsion system of the Tic-Tac UFO, the famous Tic-Tac UFO in the news cycle of the present time. And he may very well have done, although we think this other scientist in Florida, Dr. Rogero Santilli, has he's also from UFO. I should also mention here briefly that we are going to have in Vancouver on August the 21st a press conference that is part of a multi-metropolitan press conference. There will be Montreal, some great ufologists, the best of Canada. It will be held in Paris also, at the TV studios of Paris, and other cities are going to join. And this is a academic, independent ufological series of statements. So it's a panel of 4 to 6 minute statements being made of the best evidence that is not necessarily fixed in the extraterrestrial hypothesis. It will be represented, but it will be a wider ontological perspective or vantage, independent to the Office of Naval Intelligence, where the UAP task force is sitting. But we will be taking the UAP task force, the Pentagon DoD, information and giving our own understandings, our own digestion as independent academic logical community. It's necessary to have an independent voice. There we will not really touch too much upon our contacts. So we have different facets to play with, but that's going to happen in Vancouver, in the roundhouse of Vancouver, for the English speaking one. Montreal will be French and Paris will be French, and Rome may be happening as well. Journalists from all of the different metropolitan areas can ask each of the panelists in each of the countries their questions. We'll be sending it out to 950 mainstream media contacts of North America with Zoom links. Although it will be physically housed in the Roundhouse downtown Vancouver. So Jack Sarfatti is interesting in understanding how the modules create unique realities, custom made to different contactees and experiences. So during the psychedelic 60s, inebriated, Dr. Jack Sarfatti remembered when he was 13, he received a phone call from a voice that said it was on a spaceship and that it was coming from a light consciousness computer that was from our future. That's all he remembered. He went to his mum and asked her if she remembered that phone call. He said, one phone call? No, it was lots of phone calls, repeated phone calls. It was too much. In the end, I had to have a strong word to them, and she was a Jewish mother, and they never called back. So he started to remember that he was given all the scientific information from this light consciousness computer from the future, which stated that they were a civilization that had uploaded themselves into this light consciousness computer, and that they were downloading themselves into mankind through beams of light. Uri Geller, when he was 5 years old, saw a UFO in Tel Aviv, and the UFO beamed into his forehead. After that beam, he started to bend spoon and sprout seeds. And there were others. Matthew Manning was another. When Dr. Andrea Puharich started to hypnotize Uri Geller, the tape recorder would switch on, and this light computer that Sarfatti had experience with started to talk and explain the same thing, that they were a civilization that uploaded themselves into a consciousness light computer from the future, and that they were downloading themselves through these light flashes and light beams into a wide variety of mankind, including scientists and people who would bring mankind forwards. With Matthew Manning, it kind of began like a poltergeist phenomenon in Oxford. So it was very negative. Objects were being thrown all over the place. But then he started to write down information in strange handwriting. And he started to gain control of it. He started to also bend spoons. You've seen Uri Geller. He would walk into a hotel and all of the cutlery would bend. The electricity would explode. There would be UFO sightings. In the end, with Matthew Manning, he took that new energy and turned it into a healing art. So he became a gifted healer. And I think he's still healing to this day. So that's another example. So different people having that module of contact. It's a module, it's a stepping stone. So it's an icon. So they give different icons of interface. you have examples in UFO healing that Preston Dennett has compiled beautifully, where you have these spheres that come towards the person, and then they spatialize into the looking classic body. We should also remember that in the database of observed close encounters of the third kind during 1954, wide varieties of humanoids were being observed. And the classical greys were not there at that time. It was through Betty and Barney Hill that the classical greys started to emerge. Of course, later through the Roswell incident, there came testimonies to older periods in time for the greys. You did have various forms of diminutive humanoids that would form with large heads, but not the classic greys. And hundreds, if not thousands, of entities we've seen. We've had that experience ourselves. They have commonalities. There might be a one-piece bodysuit and a belt that is shared across the various humanoid types. The UFO might have three landing pods, central pillar. So there would be commonalities, but yet there would be varieties, a wide, broad variety of different humanoid descriptions. Dr. Jacques Vallée, great researcher who also worked with the French government, has revisited international contactees and has discovered a secret that was overlooked. All the contactees or experiences had a facet they didn't speak about, and that was the consciousness component. I'm also glad to say that Dr. Eric Davis, who has been briefing the Senate Select Committee, who briefed President Trump 2 times, but also Kamala Harris, said that he has briefed the 18th Senate Select Committee members on the consciousness component, it being key to the UFO contact, which goes beyond the extraterrestrial hypothesis. There is the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis. The ultra-terrestrial hypothesis is one aspect of the hyperdimensional hypothesis. With ultra-terrestrial, wide array of things can be included. Time travelers. Those time travelers can include us in the future. Parallel universes, parallel dimensions, multiverse, or omniversal. Ultra-terrestrial is quite wide. In our postulation, there is a superintelligence. Now, Dr. Ruggiero Maria Santilli, after emerging from the UFO with the plantoid being, he has memory of this. He went in with his son, the rest of the family stayed out. And the plantoids have plant technology, that's how the module appears. They're able to take different forms. Developed this new physics. And last year, in September, there were 5 days of international debates, scientific debates, called the EPR debates, or the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen debates, from 1934, where they together had said quantum theory is incomplete, has too many insufficiencies, it needs to be completed. They were not part of the gang of scientists of German branch, which is the Nazi scientists that developed quantum theory. Einstein also did not believe in the Big Bang, the expanding universe theory, as Hubble also did not, and Fermi also did not. So they believed in a continuous creation, at least in the definite they went with that understanding. So Dr. Ruggiero Santilli was at Harvard and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and he came back with these revelations and was able to complete the insufficiencies. And last year, this went through the scientific process, the EPR debates. which changes everything. It has discovered really cosmic intelligence. It shows that all of space is entangled, not quantum entangled. Quantum mechanics becomes an exception for the description of metals, crystals, not living animate systems, macro systems. So he developed a whole series of technologies which are used by the US Navy and the US military to detect shielded nuclear weapons. And this device is a fusion device. It takes hydrogen gas and it fuses the proton and the electron of hydrogen, with one electron, one proton, and makes neutrons from it. And by this fusion, they are able to detect shielded nuclear neutron cascades, and that's being used practically. However, by the old physics, it's not possible to create a neutron from a proton and electron, but this is churning out constant neutrons from hydrogen gas, like suns produce neutrons continuously at 10 to the power of 30 per second. All stars are doing something of that order. What was found was that the neutron has a greater mega electron volt than the sum of the proton and the electron. So something is giving extra energy and qualities, characteristics to the neutron. And that was discovered in 2006. This became the first evidence for a subatomic particle called the etherino. The etherino was the first subatomic particle that could not be reduced to 3 dimensions. So this new physics has a reintroduction of the universal ether without the ethereal wind, which kind of made ether theory disappear. There's a universal entanglement state where this space, this empty space, is infinitely rigid. And it begins in the heart of the atoms, called the hadronic horizon, where the hadrons that compose the heart of the atom, protons are a hadron, overlap their wave packets. And the overlap is an infinite recursion, is a total entanglement. Furthermore, in this new physics, the electron, which composes our body and is the energy of our body, has a wave packet that is the size of the universe. So what that implies is that every electron energy unit, so-called physical component of our body, is entangled with the whole universe. And so everyone is entangled. Furthermore, it is seen as an oscillation of the ether itself. So our body is a shadow hologram of an original model, which is ether. When we did our book, The Alien Presence, in 1993, we published that. It was after 2 years of research. It's a massive book. And we held a press conference in Copenhagen, January 1991, which this was the foundation of, with 75 journalists and very good television coverage, which was called JFK and the Alien Presence. We spent a long time, and also with our connection, on a particular incident that happened in 1954. Because the military sources that were there at that time, and there were some good ones, this is 10 years before the Disclosure Project. So we had the joint military personnel. There was a naval intelligence officer who was a intelligence officer for the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral Cleary. So he was briefing Admiral Cleary on many different classified topics, which included what he read in Project Blue Book Report number 13, which was never released to the public, and a document called Operation Majority. So in the book, I published, of course, his sworn affidavit under penalty perjury, which was sent to every member of the media, of what he read in those documents, and of course all of his naval release forms, which proves that he was working in his capacity thereby. So his information was different to what I was finding in 1954, related to Edwards Air Force Base or Muroc Air Force Base. During the 80s, I was privileged to have good mentors from Oxford and Cambridge. George Trevelyan was knighted by the Queen in poetry, who was a spiritual spearhead of the holistic movement, and Nigel Blair from Oxford. And so when I had my contacts and encounters, I would mention them to the mentors. And their attitude was, well, yes, so-and-so people have had similar experiences. So they would give me the literature, so that the specialness factor is removed, because that's one of the big pitfalls with contact people. And at the top of Nigel's house, in the attic, he had all the flying saucer reviews going back to the 50s. He had the Gray Barker. What was interesting in some of the Gray Barker work was that there were the Laura Mundo reports. And Laura Mundo was a journalist who was also interested in UFOs. Gray Barker was very much in the contactee movement around George Adamski. So Laura Mundo claimed that in the 70s, at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, she had met the Nordic type, and that, you know, they were love, telepathic, etc. But then she had an opposite experience. She went into a bar, I think in Phoenix, and she saw someone that looked identical to the Nordics, except with dark hair, dressed in black, and with an aura of tremendous evil. And people in the bar said, "Don't look into his eyes, he will eat your soul." So when she had again contact with the Nordic, with Air Force Base, she said, "I met someone just like you. Was that you?" And he said, "Yes, that was me." For us to operate here, for everything good or positive we do, we must counterbalance that with a negative. So another example of the idea of the module has a palette it must play with. In 1986, Whitley Strieber in Transformation wrote about this component of consciousness, where it was the consciousness communicating to him on the ship. Visitors were communicating with him, staying there beyond the body, and then drawers would be open where there were different body types, and they would animate those body types. So the being that was in the gray would go into another body type and walk that around and accept it. So this kind of example is throughout the literature. Also, Hynek, Alan Hynek, the astronomer who was part of Project Blue Book, who then became an independent researcher, his last work was on the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, that much of the literature had been adjusted to keep out the ultra-terrestrial components. Raymond Charles Moody had done the work with near-death experiences in hospitals. He came up with some cases where people were out of the body in the tunnel of light where they would see grays. So this clearly goes beyond the extraterrestrial. It goes into something that's axiomatic, that transcends genetics in that sense. So we were looking at 1954, Edwards Air Force Base, and the material we're finding, I remember a Gray Barker report dealing with it. What we were finding from the traces of the Edwards Air Force Base event was that it wasn't grays, it wasn't big nose grays that were seen there. What was being reported was human like beings. Dr. Gerald Light's letter was out in the public, but only in recent years has Dr. Gerald Light's work and his notes been released to the public domain. He claimed to have been invited amidst 250 different personnel to the event of the landing. 5 UFOs came in. We were able to find that there was a department at Edwards Air Force Base that was having communication. Wilbert B. Smith, the great Canadian researcher, was in contact with that unit. Wilbert B. Smith clearly is the pioneer in 1950 for the age of dialogues. He had a wide variety of contactees, radio ham operators that he worked with for his intelligence. He himself used dreams as an interface to communicate with the UFO intelligences. So the unit at Edwards Air Force Base had managed to get this landing to be arranged. What Dr. Light is describing is that from the landed UFO, what comes out are what he called the Etherians. So the Etherians were these light bodies. The light bodies, as they came to the ground, biochemically spatialized into the Nordic type. However, their lips were a bit blue, like when a baby is born. There are no lines on the hands. There are no fingerprints, like when a baby is born. So a biochemical spatialization of stem cells, actually very likely happening on the subatomic particle level, digitalized from the etheric form. Now, etheric here, we don't mean this ether that is airy-fairy. We're talking about the universal backset of the ether, which is hyper dense. It's almost infinitely rigid, total entanglement of space. So the Etherians he described, and there were different sources, the Earl of Clancarty had a source, were taken into a hangar at Murup Air Force Base, or Edwards Air Force Base today. And they gave warnings about the hydrogen bomb, which is a fusion bomb, because it affects many other worlds that coexist with ours. They were held at gunpoint at some point, and then they made themselves invisible. And then they imparted on the 250 personnel there the designer world idea, that our planet is artificial. It's a designer world. Today, that is a popular thought. The universe is a simulation, our reality is holographic simulation, etc. But at that time, it was brand new. So we know now from the notes released by the Light, what they described. They described that the real reality, where they come from, is planet Etheria, which is a universal planet. Basically, it is the universal ether. And that they design different realities by decoupling electrons into different positions, and that our world is designed that way. They will continue to gradually present themselves to mankind through different modules from within, if the governments would not announce their presence. So very interestingly, last year, the new branch of physics, Hydronic mechanics, went through the scientific processes. The technology was already there based on that physics, which demonstrates the total entanglement of the whole universe. And so what is our body now is a holographic shadow of an original model. And that original model can be fused to. So intermediary controlled nuclear fusion has now been demonstrated repeatedly by this new branch of physics. It's at body temperature, not hot or cold fusion. And it produces superconductivity at body temperature and even much higher temperatures, which is extremely significant. There are implications that we are able to fuse electrons of our body into the hyperdense media of the nucleus of the atom. When that occurs, we join the original model. So the original model is etheric, hyperdense media. Our electrons are oscillations of that infinitely rigid ether. So the universal backset of the ether is what Homo universalis or Homo ethericus utilizes, and it is a total entanglement of space. This new branch of science, through the EPR debates, in restoring Einstein determinism to particle physics, has also shown, as a result of the total entanglement of all space, there's a complementary total entanglement of all time, universal time, which then implies that there is a greater intelligence that has calculated all past, present, and future moments. So this already shows a greater intelligence than the ether itself. And this branch of physics has also made new telescopes. And these isotelescopes have captured our twin universe, the antimatter universe, have captured antimatter galaxies, antimatter cosmic rays, antimatter asteroids, and meteors. It's well established now for quite a while. An unexpected finding was that antimatter UFOs were also detected in Florida. So normally, when antimatter comes in contact with matter, there's an enormous explosion. Perhaps some of the fires of California, where everything melts, would be attributed to antimatter meteor. The Tunguska explosion in Russia has the attributes of an antimatter reaction. But the isotelescope uses a concave rather than a convex lens. The convex Galileo telescope sees matter light. The concave sees antimatter light. So you have two telescopes next to each other, and you aim it in the atmosphere. So in the atmosphere, there are two types of UFOs that are seen through the antimatter telescope. One is entirely antimatter. So someone in the antimatter universe is able to travel in our universe without creating explosion. But even more significant is another type, group 2, which is made out of both antimatter and matter in the UFO substance. Now, the antimatter universe has its own universal backset of an ether, but that's distinct to our own. However, in the understanding of this new physics, gravity is the influence of the antimatter universe. Anti-gravity is our universal matter influencing the antimatter universe. And so there is an iso relation of these twin universes. But these UFOs that are seen by the antimatter telescope, that are both matter and antimatter, must thereby be using the intelligence of the antimatter ether, or oneness, and the universal ether of our universe to be able to operate. This implies an intelligence, again, that is beyond either the matter or antimatter universe with these iso-material UFOs. And these are physical observed vehicles through the antimatter telescope. The Galileo telescope sees nothing. And so in dialogues with UFOs, Dr. Roger Santilli has agreed to give us some of the small antimatter telescopes so we can use those on the sites as well. What we would like to capture is when a UFO disappears, when it jumps out, to see if it goes into isomatter or antimatter. That hasn't been done yet, so that's something up ahead. We've done a lot of research that way. Last year, it was demonstrated through the EPR debates, international scientists, that there is a total entanglement of all space, which implies a universal oneness once one is in the heart of the atom, which has often been a message of the UFOs. And there's a complementary total entanglement of all time, implying a greater cosmic intelligence. So cosmic intelligence has emerged, super intelligence, that is operating, has calculated every past, present, and future moment. The Galactic Council were describing themselves as operating in past, present, and future. Always have been, always will be, always are. So this has been interesting in the new branch of science. This is Glastonbury tour. So our teenage UFO experiences happened in the outer Glastonbury zodiac. In 1987, something began in a series of sequences that we've been part of. It was the harmonic convergence of August the 17th, 1987. It was the first time that 5 million people linked together in meditation, but not just meditation. They used hemisync, synchronizing the brain hemispheres at 8 hertz. And they used the Schumann resonance, which had been made audible by Dr. Randolph Price, which is close to 8 hertz. And they sang Aum. So this was really the beginning of the Omega revolution. So it was at that event that we came across the work of Dr. Puharish with 8 hertz. And we formulated what would become our 432 hertz music movement, based on what happened there. So I was having my UFO contacts, and there was an Australian film crew who were filming me. And I was talking about, we need to keep looking up, we need to meet the space intelligences midway. And as that was happening, it was the dawn of August the 17th, there was a UFO, a golden UFO, on the horizon, which for 20 minutes was going back and forth, which they could film. So that was beautifully synchronized, because at that time, people didn't see the UFO related to the return of Quetzalcoatl. That became more evident in Mexico. So it was Jose Agualas's harmonic convergence. And of course, we thought of 2012 then as being just a bigger version of that, and not all this doom and gloom as it became. So this is us when we're 19 on the Glastonbury tour. Then in Mexico on the 7/11 event, that is the 11th of July, a series of UFOs was seen during the total lunar eclipse, which was the beginning of a new cycle according to the Dresden Codex. And this began a whole series of UFO events in Mexico. And on July the 20th of 2019, I used in my visualization this particular event on the eclipse of 7/11, 1991, to visualize over a sundance in South Dakota that a UFO would appear there, which it did, and in that category. So this was again a codex that was referring to the return of Quetzalcoatl, like Jose Agualas's harmonic convergence. And it began the whole series of types of phenomenons that would shapeshift, where spheres, fleets would join together into almost organic like serpent form, and many other types of phenomenon, including shapeshifting, having different morphologies. So here on July the 20th, 2019, and just a few days ago, it dawned on me that our first Dialogues with the Cosmos in the Swiss Alps was done on July the 20th, but that was 2013. We'd done other contact events, but this was specifically focusing on the protocols, which also started to bring scientific data. So with the help of Alfred Weber for getting our visa. At the time, I was working with Mia Ferraletto, who's the chairman of the art magazine New Observations. We were operating on issue 132. In issue 132, we introduced the idea that the UFO contact experience is a new art form. It's a form of art, three-dimensional art, also has mystical components. And she organized the Consciousness and Contact event in South Dakota. Now, I was here first on the coast, and I already knew that there would be this UFO that would park over the Sundance. So there were numerous UFO events that took place there. And there were also numerous contactees. Here we have Chief Dallas Chief Eagle doing the hoop dance into an eagle. Now, what was interesting is of the people that were there, Joan Bird, who had worked with Harvard's John Mack, the psychologist, she also knew a contactee who had 540 hours of film. And what we were seeing there was very similar to what he picked up. So we went to this Lakota Sundance. We got special permission to be there on the Indian reservation. You go on the Indian reservation, you don't feel like you're in the US anymore. You feel like you've gone into another country. And we were not allowed to take any cameras. So a bit further north, Shannon Kelly, 530 plus hours of film, captured something very similar to what we saw over the Sundance. For 2 hours, it was parked over the Sundance. Contactees present, myself, Kevin Briggs. David Cottrell is more an experiencer in Washington. We have spent some time with him, and for him, the module is unpleasant. We told him about meditation, but he wasn't wanting to do that. That's okay. John Harrison III, other experiences included Ripley Strieber part of the time, Yvonne Smith, and James Lowe, and others. But it was Joan Bird who pointed out these series of films of Shannon Kelly. So we observed a field around the object. People were watching plasma-like arms coming from the object, and this is captured by Shannon Kelly as well. The plasma arms are releasing spheres, and this was seen over the Sundance. As you can see here, the plasma spheres that are connected to the object by beams. What happened was I had seen that there was going to be something parked over the Sundance. And when I did the protocol, as they were doing their Sundance, which we're not allowed to speak about, although we all know what Sundance is, they got very offended. I focused up into space, used the protocols, there was something there, and was beaming out what happened on the 7/11 event in Mexico. And within 20 minutes, this object was parked over the Sundance, and it stayed there for 2 hours. And I think it was actually Joan Bird who first pointed it out to me. And I wasn't quite aware that it was plasma arms. I thought that was refraction. But then I heard all the others who saw these plasma arms below and above releasing spheres. Stephanie Finch from Washington stayed examining by a branch of a tree the object. I had done that for a while too. What's interesting here is you see the halo. So this halo is what we all came to see with the object after we wore the glasses of David Cottrell. So I think for me, that's the the longest lasting UFO sighting, 2 solid hours. Then watched it go off to the All Nations Gathering Center, which is where we had our lectures. Now, we had been summoned back, but some of us decided to stay at the Sundance until it was finished. And Stephanie chose, because she wanted to see where it went. It went to the All Nations Gathering Center. The next day, David Cottrell, myself, and Kevin Briggs, we decided at the All Nations Gathering Center, come on, let's do a few minutes of protocol and call our guys. And we got a response. And one of the UFOs that came over us had a beam going in front of it. So that went behind the All Nations Gathering Center, where later Becky, Chief Eagle, looking out through the bathroom, saw it parked over the field with that beam. And if you take this daylight footage, I think that beam is this plasma-like ether. Now, Shannon Kelly's 530 hours worth of film material has very specific elements, including a shifting form. And it appears to be pretty much the ship that we saw there. So let's see if these slides now show Weber then, who pointed out that July the 20th, 2019, had been predicted by Brazilian mystic Chico Xavier to be, if there had been no world war until that date, in a 50-year period, 69 to 2019, I was born in 69, then mankind would gradually be invited to the Galactic Council. And there would be some UFO appearances. And people were writing to Alfred, so where are the UFOs? We had it, 2 hours of Sundance. And of course, now we know that there were incursions in the Pacific during that period as well. That's part of this cycle now. Of course, the pyramid-shaped UFO has been debunked, even though the Navy and the Pentagon has said this is real footage. It is real footage. But that's a refraction phenomenon. But radar was picking up a lot of unknowns for more than 2 hours in July 2019, at the time that footage was taken. The mastermind of the present program, John Alexander, Colonel John Alexander, creator of non-lethal weapons, he's been masterminding the present process for a long, long time. We became aware of his work in 1990 in the book Out There by New York Times bestselling journalist Howard Bloom, who was covering the Avery, a group of intelligence people who were assigned to get to the bottom of the UFO. John Alexander worked with John Bigelow, with George Knapp, etc. And eventually Senator Harry Reid. Alexander almost had a congressional hearing in 2001, but then the Disclosure Project happened, and the senators got cold feet. So he's been thinking through this a long, long time. Of course, there are agendas involved. John Alexander, when we met in Peru in 2011, said he was still working for the NSA. He also said that he was assigned there at the Shamanic Congress to 2 different experiments, that the NSA had a biological conscious computer, and by NSA clearance, he was not allowed to imbibe the ayahuasca of the Indians, but he could join the group, and he was to use the group energy, focus on the computer, remote viewing. The second experiment, he was to use the ceremony energy with the entities he worked with. So he admitted he was working with entities. And I knew his wife, Victoria, we had quite deep conversations. They are puzzled about these entities, but they are using those entities in their intelligence work. So I asked him at the end of the Congress, we had prime time, the Saturday prime time. I had the last presentation. In between my presentation, he did a spoon bending event. The tooth fairy, she's called, from Erowid, bought a giant titanium spoon, unbendable. Needless to say, it became completely bent, and a lot of spoons were bent, including my own. So this is another facet of John Alexander's work. Then I finished my presentation, and after that, as we say goodbye in the hotel, and I asked him about the Holloman Air Force Base landing film, I asked him, how did it go? How did the experiments go? He said that the biological computer in the US did very little in terms of registration with remote viewing, but with the entities, they got a distinct signature. So that's Dr. John Alexander. He has many different facets. He also studied ethnology, which is the science of dying and death. He did it under Dr. Kubler-Ross. He was also there for 3 days with Dr. Hal Puthoff when Colonel Corso died of a heart attack. Colonel Corso was starting to speak about the time machine aspect. So these are all factors to keep in mind. John Alexander co-authored with Francis Milburn, who was a former schoolmate who became a British-Israeli intelligence agent, the papers on the UFP task force in recent months. Yes, in 1989, we in the Norwegian Alps, we also did a contact event. So we've had various forms of UFO landings. On this particular occasion, Dr. Gisela Hendon, who had been studying some of our work, we are multifaceted in our work. So our guiding intelligence brought us to focus on many different forms of what we call semantic art. But semantic art has a palette of themes. Ontology, Superintelligence, the Rigveda, new physics, sacred geometry, musicology, different fields by which you paint paintings of understanding. And so we've made a gallery of many paintings that way. Dr. Gisela Hendon has 2 PhDs, and so he was asking me about the Andromedeans, the extratemporals, I was having my regular contact with. I said, well, those are archetypes, right? I said, yes, they are archetypes, but they're also real, and they utilize unifying archetypes. For Carl Jung, archetypes are also transpersonal. They go beyond an and they are alive. A lot of people have overlooked that fact. Carl Jung's last book was Flying Saucers, a Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky, where he saw the UFO as the most important archetype of all time, and that it was the exteriorization of the psyche and the interiorization of the body. And later he said to his cousin Lou Zinstag, who presented him with the radar readings of UFOs, that these must be real vehicles inhabited by intelligent beings. That's what I said to Dr. Gisela Hendon. They are archetypes, but they're also real. He says, well, can I have a sighting? So I connect. I still have 2 years of having the ether beam or pencil beam contact, and they agree. So on the night of August 12th, 1999, at this area of the Jotunheimen, which is the land of the giants, Norwegian Alps, he's in a tent facing the mountain called Thor's Hammer. And he wakes up by a strange green light. He opens the tent. And he sees 4 spheres hovering over the ground next to him. His hair stands up. He's petrified. And then it's encompassed by a plasma that takes the source's shape, solidifies, and then shoots out into space. And that form has been seen by different people with regards to our contacts. We were in another area of the Jotunheimen Boeverdalen in 1998, and I was in the forest having a contact, and there was a seminar being conducted there. Ananda Bosman was. So she looks out the window, and from the area of the forest that I'm having my contact, she sees 5 spheres, green, and then it's encompassed by this plasma that also solidifies, and it flies off into space. So those are kind of correlative witnesses. We have about 180 witnesses, which include scientists, physicists, and lieutenants. By 1989, we had about 35 witnesses, including to some of the landings, and one went in with us. Yes. Now we come to August the 13th this year, Seychelles. I'm going to look at screenshots of this. So I was with my family at the Independence store, which is actually on the First Nation reservation. And I noted something odd in the sky as I went into the car. I first thought it was an eagle, because often there are eagles at that position in the sky. But at the same time, I thought helicopter. That's kind of strange. So that's looking at the subconscious. As we go in the car and we drive to the Sunshine Coast Highway, I tell my wife we've got to stop, because my daughter was seeing a triangle, my wife was seeing a triangle, and it was shape-shifting into different shapes. I get out the car, take out my phone, think that I'm filming. I went to film mode, and it goes directly over us. It was first hovering over the hospital, but it goes directly over us. And we observe, my wife and I observe that a portion of it becomes light, where it produces turquoise light, white light, and then it shapeshifts into different shapes. Let's look at some of these shapes. These are stills from the film. Here it's hammer-like. Then it has 2 spheres on a cylinder. I have no consciousness connection with it, no telepathy. The only consciousness connection with it is that the day before, I was thinking, well, this is going to be April the 13th. April the 13th, 1995, I had that forest contact. I wonder if there's going to be a UFO tomorrow. That was the only consciousness aspect, and this is what we captured. The interesting thing is that it is on the Indian reservation. And it takes many different forms. My daughter also saw a red light. My wife and I didn't see a red light. Here it starts to become coil-like. It has a screw-like appearance. Rapidly shape-shifting. This kind of UFO has become common through all of the New World. We did a series called UFOs of Corona, where enormous amounts of UFO footage was picked up, especially in South America, Central America, but some in North America too, which includes this shape-shifting kind that first really appeared in Mexico. Here you can see the spiral form, It also became a sphere for a short period of time. Here it's almost looking like an ice cream cone. Here it starts to look like a satellite or a space station, but it was at the height of an eagle. And we have some higher quality images. Let's see. At one point, my wife thought it was a paraglider even. So it became many, many different forms. So our understanding is that the UFO intelligences are trying to expand our horizon to what reality itself is. When you take the UFO contact experience as a synthesized reality, as a module of synthesized reality, which has a temporal reality for a time window before dissolving, or perhaps even for a longer period, one could even consider a planet to be a macro assembly of modules. We have a very distinct slideshow, hundreds and hundreds of slides, which explores planet Earth as a designer world. And in the backset of a super civilization that is behind the designer world that is operating in a past, present, and future state. The macro assembly of modules of our planet appearing to have a history and linear time. But that is a distinct presentation. The UFOs of Corona, again, hundreds and hundreds of movies, shows the patterns over time that are introduced. And also good movies have been taken of the light spheres, which some of the grays turn into, and which some of the human-looking entities turn into. So nothing felt or sensed particularly, but shape-shifting constantly here in British Columbia, part of a phenomenon being filmed throughout the New World in recent years. That was me at 17. So what happened in 1989 was I was with a Danish kind of contact group, more of a Melchizedek group, very particular. And the head of that group, Marina Monk, said that our brothers, they don't manifest physically. I said, sorry, that's not true, they do. And I went to the fjord in Denmark and established contact. I had a contact with a Captain Rama, 1989, late 1989. And December 1989, in fact, it was the 20th of December. And Captain Rama said, yes, there will be a sighting on Christmas Day, 6 p.m. But things have to be adjusted first. And you are going to have to be part of that. You'll be acting as a flavor sync so that patterns of the area, of the environment, of people would flow through. So one would feel the various relationships of people would flow through, and this would become a kind of a fuel, a midway fuel. Then on Christmas Day, we all assembled. And again, I connected Captain Rama. And next to me was Kai, who was the manager of the Sheraton Hotel. And so he got the same beam, and he got the 6 p.m. Would be the sighting. Marina Monk, however, was getting another time, but we knew it was 6 p.m. So half of the group went outside, and then we had that sighting. And what we had was a psychoactive effect, which I've encountered often. It's, we call it UFO champagne, because you feel bubbly like champagne. All the cells are tingling, especially with the exposure to the flashes. And I'm telling Marina where it was when she comes out finally. And as I'm pointing to the sky, Captain Ramos switches on her ship again and pulse flashes 3 times, jumps and pulse flashes, does that several times. And then everybody has got the champagne, UFO champagne effect. What I described there in 1991 in the audio track, which is actually a video, or my screen is showing as a video, was that one woman, Mona, I saw her shake, her body shake. She described that in seconds, she was aboard the ship. Aboard the ship, she met the entities. They showed her a wall, which was a screen, like a screen. And then she was in the screen, which was another planet. And she went through a whole life in another cultural planet. Came out of the screen, was debriefed by the entities, and then back to a body in just a second. This time dilation factor happens often in UFO cases. There might be 15 minutes of someone going inside the UFO, and they come out with 5 days of beard growth. And this works very well by understanding what the Puranic literature, after the Proto-Vedic literature, the Rig Veda, describes as the planets of the Talas and of the Lokas. Our whole universe is described to be the base of 7 Lokas as a life wave with its own time flow. Each Loka has a different time flow for its planetary worlds. The 7 Talas, which are unified by Atal Andas, which is probably the root of Atlantis, and they are given proportions in divine miles that are the binomial number figures that Plato uses to describe the 7 rings of Atlantis. So it appears to have been plagiarized from Satapatha Brahmana and the Puranas. So the Talas, you can have weeks there and only 15 or 20, 25 minutes there, depending on which of the Talas. Each of the Talas have planets with different time flows. And the Talas are described as hell worlds because they are technological hell worlds. They're described not as in biblical hell. They're hell because you're very comfortable in these worlds. The technological paradise, the senses are enthralled by the technology. So very difficult to contemplate the divine nature of everything. The Talas and the Lokas are described in one of the first FBI documents in 1947 on UFOs. So this factor of very rapid experiences, splits of a second, comes into UFO contacts. I have disappeared in front of people through several different forms. Here is a still that you can see from 1991, January, on the Danish 9 o'clock news, Channel 2, 9 o'clock news after the press conference. So we had very good media coverage, 75 or so, 76 journalists. It was packed full, and first I started reading from notes. That was no good, so I knew it flew, and went through the military cases, the documents, etc. And we had to repeat it the next day, as there were lots more people that turned up. Every media article was good at that time. So we've done numerous press conferences since then, and we will also do now in Vancouver. This was a UFO that appeared on the 27th of November, right over a site that we had worked as a portal with, called the Time Gate, and that's a big subject unto itself. Time Gate was the first experiment in psychological time traveling, chronesthesia it's called. Actually, the day after we completed this psychological time traveling, 1996, with many time gates in between, to December the 21st, 2010, the day after, December the 22nd, physics.org published chronesthesia, psychological time travel, which will be used in the future virtual reality internet. It works, but we'd already done the experiment with coherent particles meditation. And so the time gate portal is there. This was at the time that naval laboratories, observatories, recognized the perfect conjunction with galactic center in the end of November of 1998. However, on this particular date, the 27th of November 1998, I was not in Norway, where it is parked over the time gate. I was in the Netherlands picking up a passport. However, students of mine, which I had trained in these Dime Body Lotus protocols, were giving a Dime Body training on the plateau there. And during the break, there was Christina Holton and her friend Sophie. They were walking on the country road when a sports car came with a black lightning bolt on its side and slowed down, put down the window, and it was me, smiling, grinning with sunglasses, and right to them on that side of the road. But I was documented not to be in the country at that time. Christina Holton, in several other mini time gates, would hear a honking, and it would be that car with the black lightning bolt on the side, me with the sunglasses. I have zero memory of that. The bilocation experiences happened numerous times to me. Some of them I have a faint and even a strong memory of. I was discussing this in a few exchanges with Mimi. But in this particular case, zero memory. And at the same time, this UFO was captured over the time gate. I know that my body has been, I've experienced it completely scanned subatomic particle wise. And when I went into some of the stargates, like in 1998, and I would disappear, Charlotte Aldama with my mother, I would go to this place in England called Chetnell Hill, focus to the UFO networks. They appeared very regularly there and set up an ether beam network. The body is used as a transducer, as the beams in train one, and it transduces the ether beam network energy into the elemental and into the ground. That becomes a portal. So on this occasion in 1988 in Dorset, Chetnell Hill, I was dedicating the portal with you establish tremendous heart will, which you take into your whole body. That's how I found that I could call the UFO. And as I was doing that, I forgot myself. So I went into this vacuum with cascades of nodes of vacuums. But the nodes are holes, holons, you could say. But what Charlotte and my mom were seeing was that I turned electric blue, then patches of electric blue, then I disappeared. They put their arm through, and there was nothing there. Then patches of electric blue appear again, particles, then solid electric blue, and I'm back. That's not my experience. My experience was being in this vacuum with a myriads of nodes. And that's something I vaguely remember also from when I disappeared in the Golden Sphere when I was 2 years and 6 months. And there has been another form of invisibility, which I have called the ultra-terrestrial translation technology. So this is for me in Denmark. It's actually a movie. So
what is it called again? Auto what?
Ultra-terrestrial translation technology. So I'd heard about a group in South America, I just heard about it, who were also going to Ganymede. And they had a Unity manual, and we were working with Emmanuel and the Unity manual, the ultra-terrestrial umbrella or the hyper-terrestrial umbrella for these civilizations. So that was an intriguing rumor, but they were apparently going there physically, and I'd only been going to Ganymede in the ETBR mode. So I sit down on this chair, which is the sanctuary of that center, and I decide with stubborn heart will that you're going to take me physically to Ganymede. And I kept at that. That was my heart will intent. And then a series of fields started to rotate around my body, like a toroidal field, anti-clockwise. And there is this floating in every direction sense. So you're not going out of the body, you're grounding, and it's becoming like in a gyroscope. And I start to sense that my head is also to my side. After a while, I'm told you've got to surrender to your body as God already, not as the subatomic particles, but as God already. This is the one thing you've got to do. But then as it gets stronger, I'm saying, oh my God, this is really happening. And then I realize, oh my, I have to surrender to that as the divine first, as God first. And then a second rotating toroidal field is placed around me. This produces an uncanny effect where you have 4 faces, you have 4 chests, your hands are in 4 positions, your feet are in 4 positions, and that becomes kind of a macro system. Then these counter-rotating toroidal fields went head over heels. And that's when I started saying, oh my God, this is really happening, I'm shocked. And then you have to surrender to that. And then I go unconscious. And I wake up above the planet. There are the surrounding vortexes, geometries around me. I'm looking at the sun and stars, seeing networks between them. Looking at myself, I'm young, I'm old, in a special body. There are the greater primordials, the manual above guiding. And I become aware of Denmark in this tiny little country down there. And I have a third person vantage. The third person is like being at the top of the ceiling looking down. And I note that 4 people are coming into the room. So I've now cascaded down. As those 4 people join the circle of these IKEA chairs, they start talking about, I think, things like the rays of life that they're interested in. I try to get back into my body, but I'm unable to snap out of the 4-fold form. And it takes a while. Eventually, the guidance still brings up something from school where you teased, and that did it. I could lock into one set of arms, legs, chest, head. Open my eyes, there are all these whirling colors, and I'm looking to these 4 people, and their heads turn. And I said, how did you get into the room? There was an empty chair there. And I said, no, I've been here for hours meditating. I said, no, that's not possible. They were very close. So that was an interesting reference to the invisibility experience. For me, it was a superphysical. At that time, I thought I'd gone into another dimension, but some kind of superphysical. There are other realities that we can morph into. I was invisible to 4 people whilst having this completely other type of experience. So, of course, we have tons of slides, but the slides are not showing. This is Dr. Rowney Lucanen Kilder, who I spoke about, and she was heading the European Coalition Against Covert Harassment, or actually a contactee. Here we have some of the natural tunnel systems, which are part of the Dixon area of Switzerland, which is also where we were in our portal, which Madam Bush went to, some of which are military bases as well. They go extreme. Here's the military components of some of these bases, which also had the underground city. Now I have a film from a Dialogues with the Cosmos. As the slide is not showing, I think I can go to my movies folder and take this movie in. Hopefully it shows. So this movie would show a Dialogues with the Cosmos at the Fepekla and Don Blanche Glacier, where UFOs land. First they come over the group, then they land on the mountains. From the UFO that lands on the mountain, spheres are released. Those spheres come down the glacier. They're seen by quite a big group. And I sneak up on some of these spheres and I film. In Dialogues with the Cosmos, we also used very particular new equipment which had never been tested before. This is the work of Professor Korotkov. So we triangulated the Sputnik device with the biowell of Professor Korotkov on the Dialogue site on 3 computers. It measures the analog of the ambient environment. So, okay, so these are the devices. What was interesting is that every time a UFO appeared, there was also a measurement that registered. And when we did the group protocol, that also showed that it was a period of 12 minutes. It made a marked difference in the Sputnik biowell data. But every time, and here it is from another angle, the protocol period. Then we had a UFO sighting appear. What was interesting was that on one of the other devices, we were measuring the CPM, the radiation background, and it went up from 100, which is the normal, to I think 300 and
47, 70, 47.
We got 347. So we got a radiation background change at the time of the UFO sighting, one of the UFO sightings.
Wow.
Now, I have also recorded much higher CPM units, actually 90 million CPM, but only for minutes. This is called weird gamma radiation. And this happened by my former mountain cabinet in Norway, which I sold to come here. There we often had the, it's off-grid, often we had the motherships there. And with weird gamma radiation in Portugal, you get this high radiation, gamma radiation peaks, 90 million CPM, which normally should give you cancer. But because it was weird gamma, it doesn't. If it's a constant gamma, of course it does. And this is another factor of our research, which you linked a paper, we've written about that avidly, and gone into some cases there. Here we have the antimatter telescope together with the Galilei telescope, which picks up the matter and antimatter, isomatter UFOs, invisible to the Galileo telescope. The isomatter being particularly important because the technology for that is beyond one universe. It requires the cooperation of the ethers of 2 universes, implying something even beyond